Bonds revving up their marketing campaign for their new underwear range. Hello and welcome to Media Watch. I'm Monica Attard. What's the bet that none of the TV networks that put that Bonds commercial to air had any idea what the words of the song actually meant? The subtitles are ours.
Marina, amphetamina, Marina, gasolina, Marina is on fire. Meet me at the school and I'll beat you like gorilla.
Bonds tells us they had the song translated and were advised that it was okay, but then...
An email was received by Bonds from a member of the public on Monday the 5th of November advising of the slang inference of the Portuguese content. We immediately investigated the matter and sought further independent advice.
And a few days ago, Bonds dropped the ad, replacing it with one without the lewd slang. A bitter corporate takeover battle for Symbion Healthcare has been one of the big business stories of the past few months. Primary Healthcare has made a hostile takeover bid for Symbion, and all concerned have been vying for the sympathy of interested shareholders. As the public relations lines were drawn, Symbion would have been pleased with the tough questions that the Australian thought had to be asked of Dr. Ed Bateman, Managing Director of Primary Healthcare. 6 questions under Matthew Stevens' byline.
Questions for Doctor. In the hope that not even Dr. Ed can avoid answering questions from shareholders, here are a couple I think they should ask their man. 1. Why did you borrow $530 million and spend primary shareholders' money to take a 20% stake in Symbion? 2. What did you expect to achieve for primary shareholders?
But did Matthew Stevens really write those questions? Because they appeared almost word for word in an email sent out by Cannings, the PR consultant hired by Symbion, the day before that article appeared.
Subject, health, AGM questions, off the record. I wouldn't be surprised if concerned PRY shareholders wanted answers to the following questions at their AGM tomorrow.
Here are the questions sent out by Symbion's PR rep alongside what appeared in The Australian the next day.
What is the downside for PRY's business if the HSP transaction proceeds? It must be significant to spend $530 million to stop it occurring. Why did you sell your initial 7% stake in Symbion for around $3.90 and, at that time, say the shares were overvalued and then buy shares back at prices up to $4.23?
Question after question followed, all of stunning similarity. Canning sent the same list of questions it thought should be asked of Dr. Ed to Fairfax reporters. They didn't use them. Is it possible the Australian's Matthew Stevens, having been sent an email marked off the record, thought he was the only one getting it? We asked the Australian why it turned this from Canning's into this for its business pages. In response, Matthew Stevens wrote this in his paper.
The ABC's guardians of all that is proper in journalism are concerned that a collection of questions we suggested primary shareholders might want to ask Dr. Ed at a recent AGM seem to tally with a list of questions sent to media commentators by Canning's Corporate Communications. As always, the ABC is right. They do. They were good questions. I thought they were worth asking, and I still do.
The Australian is offended at being asked whether Matthew Stevens' coverage was compromised by running Symbion's line.
Coverage by Matthew Stevens has always been fearless, frank and independent, and suggestions to the contrary are not only ridiculous but offensive. The best questions often come from many different quarters.
In this case, straight from the PR spinner to the reader. Symbion's corporate rivals must feel miffed that the Australian's business reporter is happy to act as a conduit for Symbion's PR message. But how will the Labor candidate in a key marginal seat in New South Wales feel about the Australians' political coverage?
She is a tall, blonde divorcee, a mother of one who drives a Prius and is passionate about the environment. He is a local councillor in Sydney's eastern suburbs, short, dark, Jewish and passionate about her. The story of their love, or more accurately, the crashing of their feelings on the rocks of a federal election campaign, has become the talk of the white-hot electorate of Wentworth.
The she in Caroline Overington's story is Danielle Ekuye, now running for Wentworth as an independent. The he is George Newhouse, hoping to be the first Labor candidate to ever win the seat in Sydney's eastern suburbs. Overington's story detailed how the two political opponents had, until recently, been an item.
Did her now ex-boyfriend George Newhouse, Labor's candidate in Wentworth, where Jews make up about 14% of the population, in turn decide to dump her? Or is this the first relationship in history to fracture over a pulp mill?
Wentworth is held by Environment Minister Malcolm Turnbull, but it's tight, as a News Limited Commission poll showed at the weekend. Two-party preferred, Turnbull and Newhouse are each on 50%.
Turnbull, on the edge. Galaxy estimates as few as 5,000 minor party voters will decide Mr Turnbull's fate.
It's looking likely that preferences from the independent Danielle Ekuye could decide which way Wentworth falls, and the heady mix of gossip and political intrigue was irresistible for Caroline Overington, who seemed to know where those preferences would flow.
The glamorous ex-girlfriend of Labor's candidate for the prized Sydney seat of Wentworth, Danielle Ekuye, is planning to run against her former beau. And in the ultimate act of political sedition, she plans to direct her preferences away from him.
But why was Caroline Overington writing that in mid-October, when as recently as this Sunday, News Limited's Glenn Milne wrote,
"One of those Green candidates, Danielle Ekuye, was until a few weeks ago the lover of Mr Newhouse. She is yet to reveal where she will direct her preferences."
And more confusingly, 2 weeks after writing that she knew what Danielle Ekuye was planning to do with her preferences, Caroline Overington sent the independent candidate this email.
From Overington Caroline to Danielle Ekuye, sent Friday, October 26, 2007. Subject, hey there. Have you decided how to preference yet?
An hour later, Ekuye responded.
To Overington Caroline. Subject, hey there. No, sweetie, it is way too early. Let's see what happens on policy from the major parties, if anything.
Now remember, this was a fortnight after Overington had written that Danielle Ekuye planned to direct her preferences away from George Newhouse. Miss Ekuye tells us she never discussed who she would be preferencing with Caroline Overington. But the email exchange didn't stop there. Caroline Overington then took the remarkable step of getting involved in the political process in one of the most crucial contests in this election. Replying to the Independent's email that it was too early to decide preferences, Overington wrote back,
"Too early? My girl, you've got 4 weeks. Please preference Malcolm. It would be such a good front-page story. Also, he'd be a loss to the Parliament, and George, forgive me, would be no gain."
Caroline Overington certainly doesn't seem ready for the curtain to drop on Malcolm Turnbull's political career. Danielle Ekuye was stunned by the email.
"I'm disgusted to have been lobbied by a journalist from The Australian for my preferences."
Asked why she suggested Danielle Ekuye direct her preferences to Malcolm, Caroline Overington told us,
"I would say journalists use a range of different ways to get their stories."
Overington says the email was just a playful exchange, but it's one-sided play because Danielle Ekuye sees it very differently.
It's interference with a candidate. Journalists and the media are supposed to be non-biased. They are meant to independently write stories and not try to persuade or influence political outcomes by trying to persuade a candidate where their preferences will go.
Overington's response to that?
I would say I didn't ask her to send her preferences to any candidate.
So what about the words, please preference Malcolm?
It could be a way of getting a story from her.
Overington adds that later, on a bad day for Tony Abbott, she told Daniela Couillet that he needed her preferences. But Daniela Couillet says Overington was covering herself.
I think she was trying to backtrack. We all know I'm not in a position to preference Tony Abbott. She was trying to cover her tracks. The key point is that she, through that email, was trying to influence my preference flows.
And if Caroline Overington's plan was to tease out a story from The Independent, it hasn't worked, because asked about how she regards the Australian's reporter now, Daniela Couillet says,
I'm wary, very wary of her.
And given an article in today's Australian, that wariness is justified. Caroline Overington has rounded on Daniela Couillet, and in suggesting now that a Couillet might be going to preference George Newhouse, she described preferences given to the ALP candidate as toxic.
Mr Newhouse could win the seat of Wentworth, not least because of the acid rain sent down by Ms Couillet, whose preferences will likely go his way.
We asked the Australian's editor-in-chief how he regards this incident and how his readers might now view Caroline Overington's independence.
Ms Overington is a colour writer, and her correspondence with Ms Couillet seems no more than colourful.
Well, the colourful Caroline Overington wouldn't be alone at the Oz in supporting Malcolm Turnbull. Back in September, fellow columnist Janet Albrechtsen wrote an apologetic column cutting off her support for John Howard and declaring a new leader was needed. That led her colleague Dennis Shanahan to write about the Albrechtsen article.
On Wednesday and Thursday, the columnist, a strong supporter of Turnbull, and whose husband John O'Sullivan campaigns for the Environment Minister in his Sydney electorate of Wentworth, told Turnbull, as well as Tony Abbott, Nick Minchin and Downer, of her plans.
Well, that was an unusual insight into Albrechtsen's political connections. So Media Watch wrote to the ABC board member, asking about her discussions. Ms Albrechtsen sent us a brief response accusing us of bias, but she didn't answer our questions. Instead, this appeared from, you guessed it, Caroline Overington.
Albrechtsen, who was on the ABC board, said the bias in Media Watch's questions was sufficiently clear that there would be little point in responding in detail. She told the program that she considered it good practice, before forming an opinion, to do as much research as possible.
Nice to have friends at your newspaper who see the world of politics in exactly the same way. Now, listeners of John Laws will be aware that commercial radio in Australia will soon never be the same. The Golden Tonsils is about to pack up his golden microphone and drive off in his Bentley into the sunset of retirement. But after 54 years in the business, he leaves behind a lot of memories, especially for us. Over the 18 years this program has been on air, it's devoted a lot of time, care and attention to Lawsy. It was Media Watch which exposed the cash for comment scandals which caused Laws and his arch-rival Alan Jones so much heartache. As he begins his long goodbyes, we bring you this, scenes from a monumental career.
Hello world, I'm John Laws.
I have never in my life been offered or accepted anything apart from courtesy and a lunch, perhaps, for playing a record.
Nobody has become such an institution in Australian radio like you.
The bank's asked me to do a job and I'm damn well doing it. And there is nothing sinister about it. You weasels, go away.
Well, I'm not a journalist, and I don't ever claim to be a journalist. I just want to be a radio broadcaster and be as straightforward as I possibly can.
It has been a wonderful career. It's been an extraordinary time. I couldn't have asked for anything more.
Goodbye, John, and you. Media Watch will be back in 2008 with a new host, so it's goodbye for me too.